Welcome to Things I Know Nothing About, the podcast where we dive deep into topics we thought we understood, only to find out there's a whole universe of complexity beneath the surface. Today we're tackling something that might make you rethink how you view your own body, and specifically that spare tire around your middle.
Oh, Alex, this is one of those topics that feels a little bit like a gut punch, pun absolutely intended. The idea that your belly fat could be more dangerous than just being generally overweight is startling, especially when we've been conditioned for so long to just look at the number on the scale or our BMI. It really challenges a lot of conventional wisdom.
It absolutely does, Maya, and that conditioning is exactly why this new research is so critical. We're going to be talking about a groundbreaking 2026 study from the American Heart Association that really shifts the paradigm. It found that abdominal fat is a stronger predictor of heart failure than something as widely used as BMI or even your total body weight. This isn't just a minor distinction, it's a fundamental reevaluation of how we assess metabolic health.
A 2026 study? Wow. That's incredibly recent and cutting edge information we're getting our hands on right here. It sounds like this research, led by Su-Han Chen from National Yangming Chiaotung University, is really making waves and forcing us to look beyond those simple metrics we've all grown up with, like stepping onto a scale or calculating our BMI based on height and weight. The nuance here is what makes it so important for understanding our actual health risks.
Exactly, Maya.
The core finding is quite stark. Higher measurements of visceral fat were more strongly linked to heart failure risk than overall body weight. And here's the kicker. The study explicitly found that these higher waist measurements identified increased risk even in individuals whose BMI appeared to be within what we traditionally consider a normal range. This challenges the very foundation of how many people, and even some healthcare providers, initially assess health risk.
That's the skinny fat phenomenon we've heard whispers about, right? People who look perfectly healthy on the outside, maybe even thin, but are carrying a hidden danger inside. It's a reminder that appearances can be incredibly deceiving when it comes to internal health, and what's going on beneath the surface is far more critical than what we see in the mirror or what a simple scale tells us. This particular aspect of the study really brings that to light.
Precisely. The study didn't just point out the correlation, it also started to uncover why this link exists. Systemic inflammation was identified as a key mediating factor in this relationship, explaining approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of the connection between abdominal fat and heart failure risk. This suggests that visceral fat isn't just sitting there passively, it's actively contributing to heart failure largely by promoting chronic low-grade inflammation throughout the entire body, which is a significant biological mechanism.
So, it's not just about the physical presence of the fat, but what that fat is actively doing inside your body, almost like it's its own organ working against you. That inflammatory aspect is particularly concerning because chronic inflammation is a known driver for so many other diseases beyond just heart failure, making this a multifaceted threat that deserves our full attention and understanding. It's a really complex biological process that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. To give some context on the study itself, it involved 1,998 adults from the Jackson Heart Study, none of whom had heart failure at baseline. Over a median follow-up period of 6.9 years, 112 participants developed heart failure. When they crunched the numbers and adjusted analyses, waist circumference showed a hazard ratio of 1.31 and waist to height ratio came in at 1.27. These were independent predictors of heart failure, whereas BMI, surprisingly, was not significantly associated with heart failure risk in this particular analysis.
That really solidifies the idea that where you carry your fat is far more indicative of certain health risks than your overall body weight. A hazard ratio of 1.31 for waist circumference means that for every unit increase in that measurement, there's a 31% increased risk of heart failure, which is a pretty substantial jump. It makes you wonder how many people have been given a false sense of security by a normal BMI while still carrying this significant internal risk factor.
It's a crucial point. Let's delve deeper into what this visceral fat actually is, because I think a lot of people conflate all fat as the same. Visceral fat is the active fat that lies deep within your abdominal cavity, wrapping around vital organs such as your liver, intestines, kidneys, stomach, and even your heart. It's not the jiggly fat you can pinch just under your skin, which is called subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat is truly internal, and that's what makes it so insidious.
So, it's not just a cushion, it's practically strangling your organs, acting as this metabolically active entity. I've always heard that fat is more than just storage, that it behaves like an endocrine organ, but it's particularly chilling to think of visceral fat specifically producing these harmful substances right there, nestled amongst your most critical internal machinery. It's a much more active and aggressive type of fat than many of us probably imagine.
You've hit on the key point there, Maya. Visceral fat cells don't just sit idly by, they produce various hormones and inflammatory substances known as cytokines. We're talking about things like interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor, and resistin. These aren't benign compounds, they actively trigger low level chronic inflammation throughout the entire body. This inflammation can damage blood vessels, disrupt immune responses, and lead to structural changes in the heart, directly contributing to the heart failure risk we discussed.
That's a really scary chain reaction. Starting with just having too much of this specific kind of fat, it's like having a slow burning fire constantly smoldering inside you, damaging things bit by bit, day after day, without you even realizing it until significant damage has accumulated. And the fact that these substances can directly affect the liver due to visceral fat's proximity to the portal vein means it's also messing with cholesterol levels and overall metabolic function.
Precisely. This inflammatory and hormonal activity has profound metabolic impacts. It's strongly linked to insulin resistance, which is a precursor to type 2 diabetes. It can also lead to high blood pressure, unhealthy cholesterol profiles, specifically higher LDL, the bad cholesterol, and lower HDL, the good cholesterol, and even fatty liver disease. All of these factors independently escalate your risk for heart disease and other serious conditions, creating a truly dangerous metabolic cascade.
So it's not just one problem, it's a whole constellation of interconnected issues that stem from this one type of fat. It's like a domino effect where one issue leads to another, creating a systemic breakdown. This really emphasizes why focusing solely on overall weight can be so misleading, because someone might have a healthy BMI, but be experiencing all these internal metabolic disruptions due to excess visceral fat.
Absolutely. And the increased disease risk associated with too much visceral fat extends far beyond just heart failure and diabetes. It's also linked to stroke, certain cancers like colorectal cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and of course metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of conditions that includes increased blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around the waist, and abnormal cholesterol or triglyceride levels. It's a systemic threat to long-term health.
Wow, Alzheimer's too. That's really sobering. It makes me think about how many people might be living with this ticking time bomb without any awareness, and that brings us back to those skinny people with belly fat. It seems like they're particularly vulnerable because they don't fit the traditional picture of someone at high risk, so they might not be getting the right advice or even screening from their doctors.
That's a critical point, Maya. The concept of skinny fat, medically termed metabolic obesity, normal weight, perfectly describes individuals who have a normal BMI but a high percentage of body fat, especially visceral fat, often coupled with low muscle mass. The 2026 AHA study explicitly noted that a higher heart failure risk was identified by waist measurements even in those with a normal BMI, underscoring this hidden danger.
This is where the BMI really fails us, isn't it? It treats all weight the same, whether it's muscle, bone, or fat, and completely ignores where that fat is located. So you could be an avid runner with a high BMI due to muscle, or someone who's lost muscle mass with age but maintained a normal BMI, yet be silently accumulating dangerous visceral fat. It's a huge blind spot in our public health messaging.
It truly is. These individuals, the skinny fat population, appear healthy by traditional BMI standards but carry significant hidden risks. Those visceral and liver fat deposits can quietly increase the risk of hardened and clogged arteries, leading to stroke and heart attack, all while they might be completely unaware. It's a silent progression that often goes undetected until a serious health event occurs.
And the worst part is, the health risks linked to visceral fat, like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease, can develop silently without any obvious symptoms. You don't necessarily feel high blood sugar or slightly elevated blood pressure in the early stages, making it even harder for these individuals to recognize they're in trouble until the disease has progressed significantly.
So how does someone identify if they might be skinny fat and at risk? There are some warning signs to look out for. These include an increasing waist size despite a stable weight, which is a pretty clear indicator. Other signs might be low strength or muscle tone, easy fatigue, and upward trending blood sugar, cholesterol, or blood pressure readings during routine checkups. These aren't always glaring red flags, but they're important clues.
Those are definitely things to pay attention to, and it really highlights the importance of regular checkups that go beyond just BMI. A simple waist circumference measurement could literally be a life-saving piece of information for many people. It's a simple, non-invasive way to get a much better picture of internal health risks compared to just stepping on a scale.
Let's put some more numbers to this, because understanding relative and absolute risk can really drive home the danger. The 2026 AHA study, as we mentioned, found waist circumference had a hazard ratio of 1.31 and waist to height ratio 1.27 for heart failure risk. But beyond that specific study, other research paints a similar picture.
Yes, numbers help to quantify the threat. For instance, in normal weight women with a BMI between 18.5 and less than 25 kilograms per meter 2, abdominal obesity, defined as a waist circumference of 88 centimeters or more, was associated with a relative risk of 3.02 for cardiovascular disease mortality. That's a threefold increased risk of dying from cardiovascular disease, even when they appear to be at a healthy weight overall. That's a staggering figure.
It absolutely is, Maya. And to break that down further, for general cardiovascular disease risk, even in healthy, non-smoking women, every 2 inches, roughly 5 centimeters, of additional waist size was found to raise the risk for cardiovascular disease by 10%. This isn't just about extreme cases, it's about a linear increase in risk with every little bit of extra abdominal fat.
That's a powerful statistic because it makes it so tangible. 2 inches is not a huge amount, but it can significantly impact your risk profile. It really underscores the idea that even small changes in waist circumference can have meaningful health implications, making it a critical metric for everyone to monitor, regardless of their overall weight.
And the risks don't stop at cardiovascular issues. People with excessive visceral belly fat may double their risk of heart disease and triple their chances of developing dementia. Furthermore, men with high visceral fat levels are an astounding 15.9 times more likely to develop diabetes or prediabetes. These are not minor increases, these are monumental shifts in disease susceptibility, highlighting the profound systemic impact of this specific type of fat.
15.9 times more likely for diabetes, that's almost unfathomable. It completely reframes how we should be thinking about diabetes risk, moving away from just general obesity to this very specific dangerous fat accumulation. It's a very strong argument for shifting our focus in both public health campaigns and individual health assessments.
Before we move on to solutions, it's always good to touch on study funding for transparency. The 2026 American Heart Association study we're discussing utilized data from the Jackson Heart Study. The Jackson Heart Study itself is primarily funded by significant public health institutions, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NHLBI, and the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, NIMHD, both of which are components of the National Institutes of Health, NIH.
That's great to hear, Alex. Public funding from reputable institutions like the NIH adds a layer of credibility and reduces concerns about potential industry biases, which is always important to note when we're talking about health research. It means this information is coming from a place focused on public well-being rather than commercial interests.
Absolutely. And now for the good news, Maya, because it's not all doom and gloom. The good news is that visceral fat is often more responsive to lifestyle interventions than subcutaneous fat, making it generally easier to lose. This means that even if you realize you have a higher amount of visceral fat, you can take effective steps to reduce it and mitigate those risks.
That's a huge relief. Knowing that it's more responsive to changes gives people a real sense of agency and hope. So what does the research say are the most effective strategies for tackling this internal threat? I'm eager to hear the practical takeaways our listeners can apply to their own lives.
Let's start with exercise, which is almost always a cornerstone of health improvement. The recommendation is to aim for at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity most days of the week. This could be something as accessible as brisk walking, cycling, or swimming. The key is consistency and getting your heart rate up slightly.
So, It doesn't have to be high-intensity interval training or marathon running. Just consistent, sustained movement that gets your blood flowing and your body working is a great start. That's encouraging for many people who might feel intimidated by more strenuous exercise regimens. Every bit of movement helps, and building a consistent habit is probably more important than the intensity initially.
Exactly.
However, when it comes to specifically targeting visceral fat, intensity does matter somewhat. Moderate to vigorous intensity aerobic exercise appears to have a greater effect on reducing visceral fat than low intensity exercise or strength training alone. So, while a leisurely stroll is good, picking up the pace or incorporating some intervals can be even more beneficial for this particular fat.
So there's a sweet spot for intensity. It's about challenging your body a bit more to really tap into those visceral fat stores. But you also mentioned strength training. Does that play a role even if aerobic exercise is the primary driver for visceral fat reduction? Because I always hear that muscle mass is crucial for overall metabolic health.
It absolutely does. Maya, incorporating strength training helps build muscle mass, and increased muscle mass improves insulin sensitivity. Better insulin sensitivity, in turn, aids in reducing visceral fat, even without significant weight loss. Muscle is metabolically active tissue, burning more calories at rest, and it helps your body manage blood sugar more effectively, which directly impacts visceral fat accumulation.
That makes a lot of sense. So, a holistic approach that combines both aerobic activity for direct fat burning and strength training for metabolic improvement is probably the most potent combination. It's not just about burning calories, it's about improving the body's fundamental systems for fat regulation and sugar management.
Moving on to diet, which is another crucial component, prioritize a balanced diet rich in whole foods, including plenty of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and healthy proteins. These foods are packed with nutrients, fiber, and help you feel full, preventing overeating and supporting overall metabolic health.
It always comes back to the basics, doesn't it? Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins, the pillars of good nutrition. It's not about restrictive fad diets, but rather a sustainable, nutrient-dense approach to eating. I imagine limiting certain harmful foods is just as important as including the good ones, right?
Exactly. Just as important as what you should eat is what you should avoid. Limit foods high in trans fats, refined sugars, and ultra-processed ingredients. These are notorious for contributing to visceral fat accumulation, disrupting your metabolism, and generally undermining your health goals. Think about sugary drinks, baked goods, fast food, and anything with a long list of unrecognizable ingredients.
So, the typical Western diet, unfortunately, is almost perfectly designed to promote visceral fat. It's really about making conscious choices to move away from those convenient but ultimately detrimental processed options. I've also heard a lot about intermittent fasting recently. Does that play a role in reducing visceral fat?
It's an interesting area. Some studies suggest that intermittent fasting may indeed help reduce visceral fat. The mechanism is thought to involve improvements in insulin sensitivity and the body's ability to burn fat for fuel during fasting periods. However, it's important to approach intermittent fasting cautiously and ideally under the guidance of a healthcare professional, as it's not suitable for everyone.
That's a good caveat. While it might be effective for some, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and individual responses can vary greatly. Consulting a professional is always wise before making significant changes to your eating patterns. What about other lifestyle factors beyond diet and exercise?
Lifestyle factors are incredibly important and often overlooked. Quality sleep, for instance, is crucial. Insufficient sleep can increase stress hormones like cortisol and promote visceral fat development. Aim for adequate quality sleep, typically 7 to 9 hours for most adults. Sleep deprivation throws your hormones out of whack, which can directly impact fat storage.
Sleep is truly foundational for so many aspects of health, and it's easy to dismiss its importance in our busy lives, but knowing it directly contributes to visceral fat accumulation is yet another powerful reason to prioritize it. And speaking of stress hormones, I'm guessing stress management is another big one.
Absolutely. Chronic stress elevates cortisol levels, which, as we just mentioned, can contribute to weight gain, particularly around the midsection, and increased visceral fat. Finding effective ways to manage stress, whether through mindfulness, meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, or hobbies, is crucial for both mental and physical health.
It's all so interconnected, isn't it? Your mental state influencing your hormones, which then influences where your body decides to store fat. It's a complex system, but it also means there are many levers we can pull to improve our health. And finally, what about alcohol? I know that's a common contributor to belly fat for many.
You're spot on. Excessive alcohol intake contributes empty calories, meaning calories without much nutritional value, and it can also place a significant strain on the liver. This combination can contribute to fat accumulation, particularly in the abdominal area, and interfere with healthy metabolic function. Moderation is key here.
So, it's not just about the calories in alcohol, but also how it impacts the liver and overall metabolic processes. Everything we've discussed really paints a comprehensive picture of how visceral fat accumulates and the severe health consequences it carries. But before we wrap up, I think it's really important to steelman both sides of the argument, so to speak, regarding BMI versus abdominal fat measurements. While the recent AHA study and other research clearly favor abdominal fat as a predictor, BMI has been around for a long time.
That's an excellent point, Maya. It's crucial to acknowledge the utility and limitations of both. Let's start with the case against exclusive reliance on BMI. The body mass index is a simple and widely used screening tool, calculated based on height and weight. Its biggest limitation is that it doesn't distinguish fat from muscle. An athlete or a very muscular individual might have a high BMI despite having very low body fat, incorrectly classifying them as overweight or obese.
And conversely, an older adult who has lost significant muscle mass might have a normal BMI, but actually have a high percentage of body fat, especially visceral fat, putting them at risk. BMI completely misses that nuance, which is why it's so frustratingly inadequate for a full health assessment. It's a broad brush when we need a fine detail.
Exactly.
Another major flaw is that BMI completely ignores fat distribution. It provides no information about where fat is stored in the body, which, as we've spent this entire episode discussing, is absolutely crucial for health risk assessment. This is precisely why skinny fat individuals can be overlooked, as their BMI appears normal, but their internal fat distribution tells a very different, much riskier story.
So, it's a numbers game that doesn't account for the biological reality of fat storage. And you mentioned its inconsistency with health risk. I've heard that BMI's association with health risk can vary with age, sex, and ethnicity, making it an even less reliable tool across diverse populations. It's not a direct measure of adiposity or a comprehensive predictor of disease risk, which is a major drawback.
Indeed, BMI is a population-level screening tool, not an individual diagnostic one. Now, let's make the case for focusing on abdominal fat. Measures of abdominal adiposity, such as waist circumference and waist-to-height ratio, offer a much more direct and accurate assessment of visceral fat, which we now know is linked to profound health risks. These measurements literally give us a window into the fat surrounding our vital organs.
And that's the key, isn't it? They're a practical guide to the amount of visceral fat. The research, including that compelling 2026 AHA study, consistently shows that abdominal fat measurements are stronger predictors of cardiovascular disease, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, and other metabolic issues often independent of BMI. This means they're giving us a clearer, more direct signal of danger.
Absolutely. Furthermore, waist circumference and waist-to-height ratio are highly effective in identifying those individuals we've termed normal weight obesity or skinny fat, whose risks might be entirely missed if we solely relied on BMI. This is a huge benefit, as it flags a population that might otherwise fall through the cracks of conventional health screenings.
So, they catch the hidden dangers. That's a powerful argument for integrating these measurements into routine checkups. It seems like the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of abdominal fat measurements for assessing specific cardiometabolic risks, but for a balanced view, should we completely discard BMI then?
Not entirely, Maya. While abdominal fat measurements are superior for assessing cardiometabolic risk associated with fat distribution, BMI still holds some utility. It remains a simple, inexpensive, and widely accessible initial screening tool for overweight and obesity in the general population. It can still be useful for quickly identifying broad categories of weight status, particularly in resource-limited settings.
So it's a good first filter, but not the definitive answer. It's like a quick glance at the cover of a book before you dive into the chapters. It gives you a general idea, but you need to read the content for the real story. So what's the ultimate recommendation for a comprehensive assessment?
The balanced view and what experts now recommend is that both abdominal measurements, like waist circumference or waist to height ratio, and BMI should be considered during routine healthcare visits to provide a more comprehensive picture of an individual's health and risk. For adults with a BMI under 35 kilograms per meter, supplementing BMI with waist to height ratio is particularly advised, as that's often where the skinny fat risks are most overlooked.
That makes perfect sense. It's about using all the available tools to get the most accurate and nuanced understanding of someone's health. We can leverage BMI for its simplicity as a general population screening tool, but then add the critical detail provided by abdominal measurements to really pinpoint those individual risks, especially for visceral fat. It's a more intelligent, multifaceted approach.
Exactly. Ultimately, a holistic approach that considers body composition, fat distribution, and metabolic health markers offers the most accurate assessment of health risk. It moves beyond a single, potentially misleading number and embraces the complexity of human physiology. This episode has really highlighted that our understanding of weight and health is evolving, and it's essential to keep up with the science.
What a deep dive, Alex. It's truly eye-opening to realize that the danger isn't just in being overweight, but specifically in where that fat is located and what it's doing metabolically. The message is clear: pay attention to your waistline, understand what visceral fat is, and take proactive steps through diet, exercise, and lifestyle to manage it. Your heart and indeed your entire body will thank you for it.
Absolutely, Maya. And that's what we aim to do here on Things I Know Nothing About, to peel back the layers and uncover the deeper truths about health, science, and everything in between. Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey. We'll catch you next time.